A crystal-lit ballroom fell silent the moment Anthony Cole struck his pregnant wife in front of the very executives who had just applauded him. Glasses paused mid-air. Phones tilted recording. No one stepped forward. Dana Barnes did not cry. She did not speak. She only steadied herself, one hand resting over the life he had just endangered. What no one in that room understood was that the company celebrating Anthony tonight already belonged to her, and every outcome from this moment on had been quietly decided hours before he raised his hand. If you believe actions like this should never go unseen, stay with this story. Tell me where you're watching from and your local time. And if stories of truth, justice, and quiet strength matter to you, consider subscribing. The city had already begun to glow long before the night of the celebration. In downtown Chicago, where glass towers reflected ambition more than sunlight, Stratford Dynamics occupied the upper floors of a building that prided itself on visibility. From the outside, it looked like any other rising firm, clean branding, aggressive growth, a leadership team that spoke confidently about the future as if it were already secured. Inside, it was a place where perception mattered more than truth, and few people understood that better than Anthony Cole. He had spent the last 5 years constructing an image that could not easily be questioned. He worked late, spoke sharply, and moved through meetings with a precision that suggested control, even when decisions were still out of reach. To his colleagues, he was relentless. To his superiors, he was useful. To himself, he was inevitable. The promotion he was about to receive felt less like an achievement and more like confirmation. At home, however, the narrative was different. The apartment Anthony shared with Dana Barnes was not large by executive standards, but it was carefully arranged. Neutral tones, clean lines, no clutter that could be used as evidence of emotional life. It was a space designed to support function, not intimacy. Dana moved through it quietly. She was in her 3rd trimester, though most people outside the home would not have known the exact timing. Her clothing concealed more than it revealed, not out of insecurity, but out of preference. She had always chosen what to show and what to withhold with careful intention. That included her voice. Anthony had stopped asking her questions months ago. At first, there had been small attempts at inclusion, casual remarks over dinner, a few questions about her day delivered without real curiosity. Over time, even those gestures faded. What remained was commentary. "You should get out more," he had said one evening, loosening his tie as he stood by the kitchen counter. "It's not healthy to just stay in your own world." Dana had looked up from her laptop, not startled, not defensive, just present. "I go out when I need to," she replied. He gave a short laugh, not amused, dismissive. That's not the same thing. He did not wait for a response. He never did. On another night, as he prepared for a late dinner with colleagues, he paused at the door just long enough to glance back. "You know, most partners would at least try to understand what their spouse does," he said. "It helps." Image-wise. Donna had closed her laptop slowly, her fingers resting on the edge for a moment before she answered, "I understand more than you think." Anthony smirked, already halfway turned away. "Sure you do." The door had closed before she finished her breath. What he did not notice, what he had stopped noticing entirely, was that Donna's days were not empty. They were structured with a precision he would have respected if he'd been allowed to see them. Her mornings often began earlier than his, though she moved quietly enough not to wake him. Coffee brewed without sound. Curtains opened just enough to let in light without drawing attention. And then, before the city fully woke her, phone would begin to vibrate with the first of several messages. Not from friends, not from family, from people who did not use casual language. Her inbox was organized in a way that made sense only to her. Threads labeled with neutral titles, attachments stored in folders that revealed nothing about their contents. Calendar entries marked as appointments or consultations, never specific enough to invite curiosity. Anthony had seen the screen once. Only once. He had been looking for a charger and picked up her phone without thinking. It lit up briefly, revealing a list of unread emails from addresses he did not recognize. Corporate domains, legal suffixes, names followed by titles. He frowned, not out of suspicion, but irritation. "You really should unsubscribe from all this junk," he had said, placing the phone back down. "It's clutter." Dana hadn't corrected him. Instead, she had simply reached over, unlocked the screen, and cleared the notification without comment. It was easier that way. In the weeks leading up to the promotion, Anthony's presence at home became even more fragmented. His schedule extended into late nights. His tone sharpened. His patience shortened. The name Lena Whitmore began to appear more frequently in conversation. At first, it was neutral. "She's been helping streamline the reporting structure," Anthony mentioned one evening, scrolling through his messages as he spoke. Smart, efficient. Dana nodded once, not asking more. Later, the tone shifted. "Lena actually understands how things work around here," he said, standing near the window, his reflection overlapping with the city lights. "She doesn't need everything explained twice." Dana remained seated, her hands resting loosely over her abdomen. "That's good," she said. Anthony glanced at her, then as if expecting resistance. When none came, he turned back to his phone. What he interpreted as indifference was in truth observation. Dana noticed the timing of the messages, the frequency, the way Anthony's posture changed when her name appeared on the screen. The slight adjustments in his schedule that were never explained, only implied. She did not confront him. Confrontation required energy. And energy for Dana was allocated with intention. Instead, she recorded. Not in a dramatic sense, not with hidden cameras or sudden accusations, but in the quiet, consistent way she had always processed information. Dates, times, language, patterns. There were other details too. Unusual expenses that appeared in joint statements. Small at first, then more consistent. Dinners charged to corporate accounts that did not align with official events. Travel reimbursements that overlapped in ways that suggested duplication. Anthony never imagined she would notice. He had built his understanding of her around absence. Absent from meetings. Absent from decisions. Absent from the world that mattered to him. He never considered that absence could be chosen, that it could be strategic, that it could be temporary. On a Thursday morning, 2 days before the promotion party, Dana received a call that shifted the rhythm of her day. She stepped onto the balcony before answering the glass door, sliding closed behind her with a soft click. "Good morning, Miss Barnes," a calm voice said on the other end. Female, controlled. "Good morning, Evelyn," Dana replied. From inside the apartment, Anthony moved past the doorway without looking out. "We're ready for final signatures," Evelyn Carter said. "All documents have been reviewed. Michael has confirmed alignment on the financial side." Dana's gaze rested on the skyline. "And the board?" she asked. "They're expecting you at 3, Evelyn said. "Private room, same location." Donna nodded once, though the gesture could not be seen. "I'll be there." A brief pause. And Dana Evelyn added, her tone unchanged. "After today, there will be no procedural barriers left." Dana understood what that meant. Control, once formalized, did not need to announce itself loudly. It simply existed. "I know," she said. When she stepped back inside, Anthony was already adjusting his cufflinks near the mirror. "Big day," he said, catching his own reflection, not hers. "Everything's finally lining up." Dana walked past him toward the kitchen. "Yes," she said quietly. "It is." He smiled, satisfied with his own momentum. Neither of them corrected the other. By the time the sun began to set over Chicago, both of their days would lead them to the same place, a ballroom filled with people who believed they understood the story. Only one of them actually did. The building that housed Barnes Capital Group did not announce itself loudly. It stood on a quieter block, set back just enough from the main financial corridor to avoid unnecessary attention. Its exterior was understated glass steel symmetry, but without the aggressive branding that companies like Stratford Dynamics relied on. There were no banners, no oversized logos, no attempt to impress passers-by. Inside, however, every detail was controlled. Access points required layered authorization. Elevators did not move without permission. Conversations remained contained within rooms designed not only for privacy, but for silence. By the time Dana Barnes arrived that afternoon, the boardroom was already prepared. A long table, neutral lighting, documents arranged in precise alignment, screens dark but ready. At the far end of the room sat Evelyn Carter, her posture straight, her expression composed in the way only years of legal discipline could produce. Beside her, Michael Reeves reviewed a set of financial summaries, his glasses resting low on his nose as he scanned each line one last time. Neither of them stood when Dana entered. They didn't need to. Respect in this room was not performed, it was understood. "You're on time," Evelyn said, closing the folder in front of her. "I prefer not to delay decisions," Dana replied, taking her seat without hesitation. There were no greetings beyond that. No small talk, only work. Evelyn slid the first document across the table. "Final authorization for operational control over Stratford Dynamics," she said, effective immediately upon signature. Dana glanced down. The language was clean, direct, already reviewed in prior drafts, adjusted for precision, and confirmed against regulatory requirements. Nothing here was unexpected. Still, she read each line, not because she needed to, but because she always did. Across the table, Michael spoke without looking up. "The financial consolidation is complete," he said. "All subsidiary accounts have been mapped. There are minor irregularities within Stratford's internal expense reports, but nothing that affects structural control." Dana's eyes paused briefly on a paragraph before she turned the page. "Irregularities?" she asked. Michael adjusted his glasses. "Executive-level discretionary spending," he replied. "We'll address it after the transition." Dana nodded once. She did not ask for names. She already had them. Evelyn placed a pen beside the document. "Once this is signed," she said, "there will be no remaining legal distinction between Barnes Capital and Stratford Dynamics. Authority will be consolidated under your office." Dana rested her hand lightly on the table. For a moment, nothing moved. Outside the room, the city continued as it always did. Traffic conversations, decisions made without consequence. Inside, consequence waited for acknowledgement. Dana picked up the pen. Her signature was steady, unhurried, final. Evelyn collected the document, immediately sliding it into a separate folder marked for execution. "The board will convene for formal recognition at 1600 hours, she said. "Limited attendance." Dana leaned back slightly in her chair. "And internal leadership?" she asked. Michael looked up this time. "They'll be notified after the board session," he said. "Standard protocol. We recommend a controlled release of information to avoid disruption." Dana considered that. "Not yet," she said. Evelyn's gaze shifted just slightly. "You're postponing disclosure for now," Dana replied. "I want to observe their responses without influence." Michael exchanged a brief glance with Evelyn. "Understood," he said. There were reasons not to do this. Risks, variables. Human reactions that could not be predicted once authority was revealed. But Dana had never relied on prediction alone. She preferred confirmation. Evelyn adjusted the stack of remaining documents. "There is one more matter," she said. "Your attendance this evening." Dana's expression did not change. "The promotion event," Evelyn continued. "For Mr. Cole." The name was spoken without emphasis. Dana folded her hands. "I'll be there," she said. Michael hesitated. "With respect," he said carefully, "given the timing, it may be more efficient to avoid unnecessary exposure until after I'll be there." Dana repeated. The conversation ended there. Not because the concern was dismissed, but because the decision had already been made. Across the city, Stratford Dynamics operated under a very different atmosphere. The office floor buzzed with anticipation. Assistants moved quickly between desks. Invitations were confirmed. Last-minute adjustments were made to seating arrangements and presentation slides. The event had been planned with the assumption that success was something to be displayed. And Anthony Cole intended to display it. He stood near the glass wall of his office, looking down at the street below, his reflection layered over the movement of traffic. His phone rested in his hand, a message thread open. Lena Whitmore had responded less than a minute ago. "Everything's set. You're going to own that room tonight." Anthony smiled. Not broadly, not emotionally, but with satisfaction. He typed quickly, "I already do." He slipped the phone into his pocket just as a knock sounded against the glass. "Come in," he said. The door opened to reveal Daniel Brooks, one of the senior managers who had been with Stratford longer than most. "Big night," Daniel said, stepping inside. His tone was friendly but measured. Anthony nodded. "Long overdue." Daniel hesitated for a moment, as if considering whether to say more. "There's been some movement upstairs," he added. "Corporate. Not sure what it means yet." Anthony waved it off. "They always move," he said. "Doesn't change anything down here." Daniel studied him briefly. "Right," he said. But he didn't look convinced. After he left, Anthony returned his attention to the city. He had built this position. Every late night, every calculated conversation, every alliance formed and discarded when necessary. Whatever movement was happening above him was just that, above him. Irrelevant. What mattered was tonight. Recognition, visibility, proof. Back at Barnes Capital, the board session concluded without incident. Votes were recorded, minutes documented, authority acknowledged. There were no objections. There never had been. By the time Dana left the building, the structure was complete. Ownership, control, responsibility. All of it now rested formally in her hands. Her car waited at the curb. She did not check her phone as she stepped inside. She did not need to. Everything that required her attention had already been addressed. As the vehicle moved through the city, the skyline shifted from business to spectacle. Lights brightened. Buildings softened. The controlled environment of the boardroom gave way to the curated elegance of hospitality. The hotel hosting the event stood ahead, its entrance framed by glass and gold. Inside, a ballroom prepared to celebrate a man who believed he was rising. Dana stepped out of the car without hesitation. Her reflection caught briefly in the glass doors as they opened. Composed, unremarkable to those who did not know where to look. She adjusted the sleeve of her coat, her hand brushing lightly against the curve of her abdomen. No announcement marked her arrival. No recognition followed her inside. Just another guest? Just another presence in a room that would soon shift? Upstairs, Anthony adjusted his jacket for the third time. Lena stood nearby, her expression confident. "They're all here," she said. "Senior leadership, clients, media." Anthony nodded. "Good." He took a breath, steadying himself. This was the moment he had been working toward. The room, the attention, the future. He stepped forward. Neither of them noticed when Donna entered. Not yet. But they would. Everyone would. just not in the way they expected. By the week of the promotion party, Anthony Cole had begun to confuse anticipation with immunity. It happened gradually, the way moral failure often does. Not as a single dramatic change, but as a series of permissions he granted himself in private until they became habits he no longer examined. He interrupted more easily. He dismissed more quickly. He spoke to people not as if they were beneath him exactly, but as if their value depended on whether they were useful to his ascent. At work, that made him look decisive. At home, it made him cruel. The first person to notice the shift had not been Dana. It had been nearly everyone else. Receptionists straightened when Anthony passed, not out of respect, but caution. Junior staff learned to keep answers short. Mid-level managers who once tried to challenge him now chose silence unless absolutely necessary. He had become the kind of man whose success seemed to authorize his sharpness, and in offices like Stratford Dynamics, that kind of man was rarely corrected until the damage had already spread too far. Dana watched this transformation without announcing that she was watching. She saw it in small things. The way he began speaking over waitstaff when they were out to dinner. The way he corrected her wording in front of other people, even when she had said nothing incorrect. The way he seemed newly irritated by softness itself, by patience, by quiet, by anyone who did not make ambition visible enough to impress him. One evening, 3 nights before the event, they attended a small pre-party gathering at a rooftop bar hosted by one of Anthony's colleagues. It was not an official corporate function, but enough Stratford employees were present for the room to feel like rehearsal. Dana wore a dark maternity dress beneath a long tailored coat. Nothing flashy, nothing apologetic. She entered the room beside Anthony, though within minutes she was no longer truly beside him at all. He moved ahead, as if being seen alone served him better. Near the bar, Lena Whitmore was already waiting. She was polished in the effortless way that required effort. Ivory blouse, black trousers, gold hoops, heels sharp enough to sound expensive against polished floor. She laughed with her head angled slightly back, one hand resting at her waist, as if she understood exactly where cameras would find her, even when there were no cameras present. Anthony saw her before she saw him, or rather, before she pretended to see him. "There he is," Lena said warmly once he approached. "The man of the hour." Anthony smiled in the way he reserved for professional admiration delivered publicly. "Still a few days early," he said. "Not really," she replied. "Everyone already knows." Dana had stopped near a high-top table at the edge of the room. From there she could see them clearly without appearing to study them. There was nothing explicit in the distance between Anthony and Lena. Nothing that would justify a scene. But intimacy did not always need contact. Sometimes it lived in familiarity, in timing, in the ease with which one person occupied another's attention while the spouse stood visible and irrelevant 10 feet away. A woman from Human Resources, Megan Holloway, approached Dana with a polite smile. "You doing okay?" she asked, glancing briefly toward Dana's stomach. "Long night for you." Dana returned the smile, calm and unreadable. "I'm fine. Thank you." Megan hesitated, then lowered her voice just slightly. "I hope Anthony remembers that." Dana followed her line of sight for a moment. Anthony and Lena were laughing, now shoulders tilted toward each other, their conversation closed to the room. "He remembers what matters to him," Dana said. Megan looked at her as if trying to decide whether that sentence was resignation or warning. Dana gave no further help. Later that night, on the drive home, Anthony was in a good mood. He loosened his tie, checked his phone at a red light, then leaned back in the driver's seat with the loose confidence of a man who believed the next chapter had already been secured. "You could have made more of an effort," he said suddenly. Dana turned her head slightly toward him. "In what sense with people?" he replied. "With the room. You were quiet. I was listening. That's the problem." He gave a small laugh. "You always look like you're somewhere else." Dana looked out through the windshield at the red glow of traffic ahead. Maybe I am. Anthony glanced over. I'm serious, Donna. These things matter. People notice. Wives help shape perception. The statement settled between them without urgency, which somehow made it colder. Dana rested one hand over her abdomen. And what perception were you shaping tonight? He exhaled through his nose. There it is. That tone. What tone, he did not answer directly. Instead, he said, Lena knows how to work a room. She understands timing, optics. She gets that success is not just about what you do. It's also about what people see. Dana let the silence extend just long enough for the meaning to expose itself. Then she said, I see. Anthony shook his head, as though she had disappointed him by not becoming jealous enough to entertain him. What he wanted increasingly was reaction, something loud enough to confirm his importance. Dana denied him that over and over, and each denial sharpened his need to dominate in other ways. The next morning, the evidence arrived in quieter form. Their joint banking portal sent a routine spending summary to Dana's inbox. She opened it at the kitchen table, while coffee cooled beside her. There were the usual charges: fuel lunch meetings, dry cleaning ride services, client dinners. And then there were the others: a jewelry purchase made during business hours, a boutique hotel reservation that had later been reimbursed as travel preparation, a high-end restaurant bill charged to Stratford's executive entertainment account on a night Anthony had told her he was working through quarterly projections. Dana did not react outwardly. She enlarged the screen, reviewed timestamps, then cross-checked them against dates she had already written down in a private notebook she kept in a drawer beside the bed. Not dramatic notes, not accusations, just entries. Thursday, 8:40 p.m., claimed board prep. Card charge Marlowe. Room River North. 2 guests. Saturday, 2:15 p.m., claimed vendor meeting. Corporate reimbursement filed Monday. The pattern was no longer speculative. Not that infidelity was the center of Dana's attention. It was not. Betrayal had many forms, and for her the larger pattern mattered more than the romantic one. Misuse of funds, misrepresentation, abuse wrapped in confidence. Those things told her more about Anthony than any message thread could. Still, she checked his tone whenever Lena's name appeared. That afternoon, Anthony came home earlier than usual and found Dana in the study corner of the living room with her laptop open. He set his keys down with unnecessary force. "You've been on that thing all day." Dana looked up. "Part of it." He shrugged out of his jacket. "Doing what exactly?" "Reviewing a few things." His expression shifted into something almost amused. "Reviewing." He repeated the word as if it were decorative. "Dana, let's be honest. You don't need to make your days sound more important than they are." The apartment went still. He had said harsher things before, not always in volume, sometimes in form. This was one of those times. A sentence crafted not to explode, but to reduce. Dana closed her laptop carefully. "I wasn't aware importance required your approval," she said. Anthony stared at her. For a second, she thought he might recognize the danger in underestimating a person who still had enough calm left to speak that way. But he only smirked. "There it is again," he said. "You hide behind these little lines like they mean something." He stepped closer. "You know what your problem is? You think silence makes you deep. It doesn't. It makes you invisible." Donna held his gaze. And because the narrator knew what Anthony did not, it could already see the irony standing in the room between them. Invisible. That was the word he chose for the woman whose signature had just redrawn the chain of command above his head. Dana spoke quietly. "Then stop looking through me." Anthony laughed once harshly. "If I looked through you any less, Dana, I'd see nothing." He walked away before the sentence finished echoing. The bedroom door shut. From the hallway came the sound of drawers opening and closing, hangers striking metal, his phone vibrating across the dresser. Dana remained where she was for several seconds, one hand resting on the edge of the table, until the room settled again. Then she opened her laptop. No trembling, no tears, no call to a friend for emotional rescue. Instead, she sent a brief email. To Evelyn Carter, subject preserve all discretionary expense reports tied to Anthony Cole last 6 months. Then a second. To Michael Reeves, subject. Please flag any reimbursement anomalies linked to executive promotion accounts. She read both before sending them. No explanation, no emotion, only precision. Outside the bedroom, Anthony was choosing cufflinks for a night that still belonged to his imagination. In the living room, Dana was finishing the first quiet movements of a record that would not forget anything. The party had not happened yet, but the paper trail was already beginning to close around him. By the time the city reached mid-afternoon, the rhythms of two separate worlds had already begun to diverge beyond repair. At Barnes Capital Group, the environment remained controlled, deliberate, untouched by the noise of celebration building elsewhere. There were no decorations, no anticipation in the air, no rehearsed applause waiting to be released. Only process, only consequence. Dana Barnes arrived without announcement. The reception staff did not greet her by name, but their posture shifted the moment she stepped through security. Not recognition in the public sense, something more internal, measured, trained. She moved directly toward the private elevator, her reflection briefly visible in the brushed steel doors before they opened. Inside, the silence held. No music, no screens, only the steady rise of floors beneath her feet. Her hand rested lightly over her abdomen, not out of discomfort but awareness. Every movement was accounted for, every step deliberate. The life she carried did not slow her decisions. It clarified them. When the doors opened, Evelyn Carter was already waiting. "You're right on schedule," Evelyn said. "I don't intend to be late for this," Donna replied. They walked together toward the boardroom without further exchange. Words were unnecessary when alignment had already been established. Inside, Michael Reeves stood near the far end of the table, reviewing a final set of financial summaries displayed on a private screen. He looked up as Dana entered, nodding once. "All accounts reconciled," he said. "Transfer structures are complete. Authority flows cleanly." Dana took her seat. "Any resistance?" she asked. Michael shook his head. "None that matters." Evelyn placed a set of documents in front of Dana, their arrangement precise, their significance already understood. "These are the final execution copies," Evelyn said. "Operational authority, board acknowledgement, control over subsidiary governance, including Stratford Dynamics." Dana looked down at the top page. Her name was printed without embellishment, not as a symbol, not as a title meant to impress, simply as the individual responsible. The room remained still as she reviewed each section. She did not rush. She never did. Across from her, Evelyn watched with the calm patience of someone who had built a career on timing. Michael remained silent, his attention fixed on the details that would outlast any single decision. Dana turned the final page. Her hand moved toward the pen. There was no ceremony in the gesture, no speech, no declaration, just a signature placed exactly where it needed to be. The moment it touched the page, the structure changed. Not visibly, not in a way that would reach the floors of Stratford Dynamics immediately. But legally, irrevocably, the chain of command had shifted. Everything that Anthony Cole believed he was stepping into now existed within Dana's control. Evelyn collected the signed documents and secured them in a separate folder. "Effective immediately," she said. Michael exhaled quietly, not relief, but completion. "Financial integration is now enforceable," he added. Any internal review can proceed without obstruction. Donna leaned back slightly. Begin with discretionary spending, she said. Michael nodded once. It's already flagged. Evelyn adjusted the remaining files. There is also the matter of internal conduct, she said carefully. Dana met her gaze. I'm aware. There was no need to specify. The footage from the party had not yet been recorded, but the patterns leading toward it were already documented. Behavior language escalation. Dana hadn't waited for a single moment of impact to begin paying attention. She had been watching long before that. Evelyn paused, then continued. You have the option to initiate formal review immediately after tonight or delay until after internal announcements. Dana considered that. If I delay, she said, they'll attempt to manage the narrative. Michael gave a slight nod. They already will. Donna's expression remained unchanged. Then we proceed as scheduled, she said. No adjustments. The decision settled into the room without resistance. There would be no intervention before the event. No warning issued. No quiet correction offered to Anthony. The system would not bend to protect him from himself. Evelyn closed the final folder. The board session is prepared for 1600, she said. Attendance is limited. Formal recognition only. Dana stood. I'll be there. As they exited the room, Michael remained behind for a moment, reviewing the financial screens one last time. Numbers, transfers, authorizations, all aligned. There was a clarity to it. A precision that left no room for misinterpretation. Across the city, that precision did not exist. At Stratford Dynamics, the mood had shifted into something brighter. Faster, less controlled. The office floor carried a different kind of energy anticipation mixed with performance. People moved with purpose, but also with awareness. They knew tonight would be seen, remembered, possibly recorded. And in rooms like that, behavior adjusted accordingly. Anthony Cole stood in front of the mirror in his office, adjusting his tie for the third time. Not because it was wrong, because he needed to feel it was right. Behind him, the city reflected across the glass wall, its movement framing him in a way that suggested elevation. He checked his phone. A message from Lena Whitmore appeared. Everything's confirmed. They moved you to center table, executive visibility. Anthony smiled, not broadly, controlled. As expected, he typed back. A moment later, another message. Tonight matters. He looked at the screen a second longer than necessary, then responded. I know. What he believed was that tonight would confirm his place. What he did not understand was that his place had already been defined, just not in the direction he imagined. A knock sounded against the glass. Come in, Anthony said. Daniel Brooks stepped inside, again his posture slightly more cautious than earlier in the week. Everything set, he asked. Anthony nodded. Locked in. Daniel hesitated. There's been more movement from corporate, he said. Unusual timing. Anthony exhaled a hint of impatience breaking through. Daniel, there's always movement, he said. We're the ones executing. That's what matters. Daniel studied him for a moment. Right, he said again. But the word carried less certainty this time. After he left, Anthony turned back to the mirror. He adjusted his jacket once more, smoothed the fabric, aligned the cuffs. The details mattered. The image mattered. Perception, as he had said, was everything. He picked up his keys, his phone, and headed toward the door. Back at Barnes Capital, the board session concluded exactly as expected. Votes were recorded, authority acknowledged, minutes documented, no objections raised. When Dana stepped out of the building, the air had cooled slightly, the late afternoon sun lowering itself against the skyline. Her car waited without delay. She entered without checking her phone. There was nothing left to confirm. Everything had already been decided. As the car moved through traffic, the city transitioned again from structure to display, from boardrooms to ballrooms, from control to illusion. Dana watched it pass without attachment. The hotel rose ahead, its entrance framed in light and expectation. Inside, people gathered to celebrate a version of success that had not yet been tested. She stepped out of the car, adjusted her sleeve, and walked inside without announcement. Upstairs, Anthony was already moving toward the room that would carry his name for the night. Below, Donna entered the same building under a different understanding. The distance between those two truths had never been smaller or more dangerous. The hotel had been designed to impress people who needed confirmation that they belonged. Everything about it suggested elevation. Marble floors polished to a mirrored sheen. Chandeliers arranged in precise symmetry. Soft music calibrated not to interrupt conversation, but to elevate it. Even the air carried a faint, curated scent, something neutral, expensive, forgettable, in the way luxury often chose to be. By the time Dana Barnes stepped into the lobby, the evening had already begun to gather its audience. Groups formed and reformed near the bar. Conversations hovered just below laughter. Names were exchanged, titles emphasized, alliances tested through posture more than words. It was not yet loud, but it was already performative. Dana moved through it without altering her pace. Her coat remained closed, her presence unannounced. To anyone who noticed her, she appeared as what she had always allowed herself to appear, to be someone adjacent, someone accompanying, not central. That assumption made it easier for everyone, including her. At the far end of the lobby, a pair of Stratford assistants stood beside a discreet registration table. They checked names against a printed list, handing out small cards that indicated table placement for the evening. One of them, a young man with an earpiece he did not quite know how to use, looked up as Dana approached. "Name?" he asked. "Dana Barnes." He scanned the list quickly. For a moment, his finger paused, then moved. "Table 14, he said, handing her a card without looking up again. Dana accepted it with a small nod. No recognition, no hesitation. The system had placed her exactly where it believed she belonged. She did not correct it. Inside the ballroom, the space opened wide under crystal light. Round tables filled the room in careful symmetry, each one marked with subtle numbering, each seat assigned with quiet intention. The stage at the front held a single podium and a large screen displaying Stratford Dynamics branding in polished, restrained motion. It was a room built for narrative. Tonight, that narrative had already been written in the minds of those attending. Dana moved toward the edges first, not hiding, observing. From there, she could see everything without becoming part of anything. Near the center of the room, Anthony Cole stood surrounded by a cluster of senior staff and mid-level managers, their body language arranged around him in a loose circle that acknowledged his rising position without appearing too deliberate. He wore a dark suit that fit precisely the kind of tailoring that suggested both care and intention. His posture was upright, his movements controlled, his voice measured just loud enough to be heard without seeming to demand attention. He was performing well. To those who did not know him beyond this context, he looked exactly as he intended to look. Confident, earned, inevitable. At his side, Lena Whitmore stood slightly closer than anyone else, not touching, not obviously aligned, but present in a way that suggested access. She leaned in occasionally, her comments brief, her laughter timed carefully to match his. When others spoke, she listened with just enough attentiveness to be included, but her attention always returned to Anthony. It was not subtle, but it was not blatant either. It existed in that narrow space where denial remained possible. Across the room, Dana watched. Not with suspicion, with confirmation. She noted the distance between them. the frequency of eye contact, the way Anthony's posture shifted toward Lena without conscious adjustment, the way conversations closed slightly when others approached, then reopened when they moved away. Patterns. Always patterns. A server passed nearby with a tray of champagne flutes. Dana took one more for the appearance of participation than for the drink itself. She held it loosely, the glass catching light as she moved toward her assigned table. Table 14 sat near the back, close enough to see the stage, far enough to be forgotten. A few others were already seated. Megan Holloway from HR looked up as Dana approached. "Oh, hey," Megan said, surprised but polite. "I didn't know you'd be here." Dana set the table card down beside her place. "I was invited." Megan gave a small, uncertain smile. "Right, of course." The other guests at the table offered brief acknowledgments before returning to their conversations. Market projections, client retention, speculation about leadership changes. The language of people who lived inside structures they did not control but believed they understood. Dana listened. She always did. At the front of the room, the lights shifted slightly, signaling the approaching start of the formal portion of the evening. Conversations softened. Movement slowed. Attention began to orient toward the stage. Anthony stepped forward, guided by a subtle gesture from one of the event coordinators. Lena remained behind, but only just. Her gaze followed him with a focus that did not attempt to disguise itself. Dana adjusted her posture in her chair, one hand resting lightly over her abdomen, the other holding the stem of the glass. No tension, no anticipation visible from the outside. Only stillness. On stage, a senior executive, Richard Halpern, Vice President of Operations, took the podium first. His voice carried easily across the room, practiced and confident. "Good evening," he began. "Tonight we gather to recognize growth leadership and the individuals who continue to push Stratford Dynamics forward." Applause followed. Measured, appropriate. Richard continued outlining the company's recent successes, the strategic direction, the importance of strong leadership in times of expansion. It was the kind of speech that sounded meaningful without requiring listeners to question its content. Then he shifted. "And it is my privilege," he said, "to introduce someone who embodies that leadership." Anthony's name followed. The room responded as expected. Applause rose louder, now more focused. Anthony stepped onto the stage. For a moment he stood still, allowing the recognition to settle. Then he smiled. From the back of the room, Dana watched the exact second his expression changed from acknowledgement to ownership. He believed this moment belonged to him. The microphone adjusted slightly as he leaned in. "Thank you," Anthony began, his voice steady. "This means a lot." There was a pause. Not hesitation, timing. He spoke about effort, about teamwork, about long hours and shared goals. The language was familiar, but his delivery gave it weight. He knew how to hold a room, how to extend a moment just long enough to make it feel earned. At one point, his gaze moved across the audience, not searching, selecting. It passed over Dana without stopping, as if she were part of the background. As if she had always been. Dana did not move, did not react, did not attempt to be seen. She simply remained where she was, her attention fixed, her presence unchanged. Because the narrator already knew what the room did not, that this arrangement, this distance, this hierarchy, this illusion of control was temporary. And that before the night ended, every position in this room would need to be reconsidered. Anthony continued speaking. The room continued listening. And Dana continued watching. The space between them remained intact. For now, applause had a rhythm in rooms like this. It rose not from genuine emotion, but from alignment. People clapped because others were clapping. They smiled because the moment required it. And as Anthony Cole stood beneath the chandelier light, receiving that steady wave of approval? He adjusted himself into it, as if it were something he had always known how to wear. From the back of the room, Dana Barnes observed the exact cadence of it. Not the sound, the timing, the way certain executives began first setting the tone. The way mid-level managers followed half a beat later, calibrating their response to match those above them. The way a few individuals clapped slightly longer than necessary, as if duration could substitute for influence. None of it was accidental, and none of it surprised her. On stage, Anthony allowed the applause to settle before continuing. He placed one hand lightly on the podium, his other adjusting the microphone with practiced ease. There are moments, he said, his voice carrying cleanly across the room, when you realize the work you've been doing isn't just effort, it's direction. The words were familiar, polished. They had likely been rehearsed, or at least repeated internally enough times to feel natural. But beneath them there was something else: ownership. He spoke not as someone receiving opportunity, but as someone confirming it. Dana tilted her head slightly, her gaze steady. She had heard this tone before. Not in boardrooms, at home. You don't get here by waiting, Anthony continued. You get here by understanding what matters and making sure you're the one delivering it. A few heads nodded. Some leaned forward. Others remained still measuring. At table 14, Megan Holloway glanced briefly at Dana, then back toward the stage. It was a small gesture, almost unconscious, but it carried weight. Megan had heard Anthony speak before. She recognized the shift in him over the past months. Confidence had hardened, and something else had grown beneath it. Anthony continued, his voice gaining momentum. I've been fortunate to work with people who understand that success doesn't happen by accident. It's built, structured, maintained. He paused. Just long enough. And it's also protected. The word lingered in the air slightly longer than the others. Protected. From what he did not specify. He didn't need to. In his mind, he was referring to competition, to inefficiency, to anything that threatened the trajectory he had constructed for himself. But to Dana, the word carried a different weight. Protection was not something Anthony had practiced, not in the ways that mattered. Her hand shifted slightly, resting more firmly over her abdomen. The movement was subtle, almost imperceptible to anyone not looking directly at her. She was not thinking about the speech anymore. She was thinking about timing. On stage, Anthony's tone shifted again. Softer now, more personal. There are also people in your life, he said, who support you in their own ways. A faint ripple moved through the audience. This was the expected moment, the acknowledgement, the partner, the image. Dana did not look up. She didn't need to. She already knew what he would do with this moment. Anthony's gaze moved across the room again. This time slower, more deliberate. When it reached the back, it paused. Not on Dana, near her. Then it shifted just enough to include her without fully centering her. My wife is here tonight, he said. A few heads turned, not all, just enough. Dana lifted her eyes slightly, meeting the space in front of her rather than his face. She's been part of the journey, Anthony continued. There was a slight hesitation in the sentence, not emotional, calculative, as if he were deciding in real time how much credit to assign, though he added a small smile touching the edge of his mouth. I think we can all agree she prefers to stay out of the spotlight. A few quiet laughs followed. Soft, contained, safe. Dana's expression did not change, but the room shifted just slightly, because what Anthony had just done was not overt. It was not aggressive. It was something more subtle. He had acknowledged her and diminished her in the same breath, the kind of move that allowed those listening to participate without feeling responsible. Anthony continued, encouraged by the response. Not everyone is built for this environment, he said. And that's okay. Another pause. Longer this time. It takes a certain mindset, a certain level of engagement. The implication settled into the room like dust. Not loud, not obvious, but present. At table 14, Megan's fingers tightened slightly around her glass. She did not look at Dana this time. She didn't need to. She had heard enough. Across the room, Lena Whitmore watched from just off stage. Her posture relaxed, her expression supportive. She nodded once as Anthony spoke, her approval visible but controlled. Anthony noticed. Of course he did. His gaze returned to her briefly, then back to the audience. And I've been lucky, he added, to work closely with people who understand that level of commitment. The emphasis was small, but intentional. Dana followed the direction of his glance. Confirmation, always confirmation. The patterns aligned exactly as she had recorded them. Language, timing, association. There was no longer any ambiguity. On stage, Anthony moved toward the close of his speech. I'm excited about what comes next, he said. Not just for me, but for Stratford, for the direction we're heading. Applause began again, this time louder, more confident. The room had accepted the narrative. Anthony stepped back from the podium, nodding in acknowledgement, as the sound filled the space once more. From the back of the room, Dana remained still, her glass untouched, her posture unchanged. She did not join the applause. Not because she refused, because she did not participate in illusions she did not share. As Anthony stepped down from the stage, several executives moved forward to greet him. Hands extended, words exchanged, smiles sharpened into something closer to alignment. Lena approached him last. Her hand touched his arm briefly as she leaned in to say something only he could hear. He smiled. Not the public one, a smaller version, more real. Dana watched the interaction without interruption, because this was the final layer, the last confirmation before action. Around her, the room began to shift back into movement. Servers circulated, conversations resumed. The formal portion of the evening dissolved into something looser, more fluid. But the energy had changed. Subtly. Those who paid attention could feel it. Something had been exposed. Not enough to break the surface, but enough to fracture it. At table 14, Megan finally looked at Dana. For a moment, their eyes met. Megan opened her mouth slightly, as if to say something, then stopped. Because there were no words that would fit this moment without making it larger than the room allowed. Dana gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Not reassurance, not dismissal, acknowledgement. Then she looked back toward the front of the room, where Anthony stood surrounded, elevated, certain. The distance between them remained, but it had changed, not in space, in meaning, because the man who believed he had just secured his future had just revealed enough to lose control of it. And Dana, who had said nothing, now had everything she needed. The applause faded, but the sound did not fully leave the room. It lingered in the way people adjusted their posture afterward, in the loosened conversations, in the slightly elevated tone that followed recognition. The formal program had ended, but the performance continued. In spaces like this, it always did. At the front of the ballroom, Anthony Cole was already surrounded. Hands reached for him. Firm handshakes, brief congratulations. Carefully chosen words meant to attach themselves to his momentum. Senior managers spoke first, their approval measured, but visible. Others followed, layering their own alignment on top of it. Anthony responded to each of them with controlled confidence. Appreciated. Couldn't have done it without the team. We're just getting started. The phrases were familiar, but his delivery made them sound specific. He had always understood how to operate in these moments, how to mirror just enough humility to keep people comfortable while still allowing the center of gravity to remain on him. Behind the cluster, Lena Whitmore waited. Not impatient, not passive, positioned. When the outer ring of conversation shifted, she stepped forward seamlessly, her presence accepted, without question. "That was exactly right," she said, her voice low enough to remain private. "You held them." Anthony allowed himself a brief smile. They were ready to be held. Lena's hand rested lightly against his sleeve for a fraction longer than necessary. "Tonight matters," she said again. Anthony didn't respond immediately. He didn't need to. The agreement had already been established. Across the room, the distance between Dana Barnes and the center had not changed. But the room itself had. Movement replaced stillness. Conversations overlapped. Laughter returned in fragments, less controlled, now less measured. The structure of the evening had dissolved into something more fluid, more unpredictable. Dana remained seated for several seconds after the applause ended. Her glass still untouched, her posture unchanged. But her attention sharpened, because the moment after performance, the moment when people believed the tension had passed, was often when behavior revealed itself most clearly. She rose quietly from her seat. No one stopped her. No one marked her movement as significant. To the room, she was still what they believed her to be, peripheral. She moved toward the side corridor leading to the restrooms and service access. Her steps unhurried, her gaze neutral. Along the way, she passed clusters of conversation, snippets of praise speculation, subtle recalibration. He's moving fast. Corporate's been quiet, though. Still, tonight says everything. Dana absorbed each fragment without reacting. Because the room was not wrong. Tonight did say everything, just not what they thought. Near the corridor entrance, she paused briefly, adjusting her coat. Not to conceal herself, but to give space. From behind her, footsteps approached quickly. Dana. She turned. Megan Holloway stood a few feet away, her expression uncertain but deliberate. "Are you okay?" Megan asked. The question was careful, not intrusive, but not entirely neutral either. Donna met her gaze. "I'm fine." Megan hesitated. "I didn't like the way he spoke," she said quietly. On stage, Dana considered the statement. "He spoke the way he understands things," she replied. "That doesn't make it right." "No," Dana said. "It doesn't." There was no anger in her tone. No invitation for agreement. Just acknowledgement. Megan exhaled slowly. "If you need anything, I know," Dana said gently. Megan nodded, the offer lingering between them before she stepped back. Dana watched her go for a moment, then continued down the corridor. At the far end, near a partially open service door, the atmosphere shifted. The noise of the ballroom softened, replaced by the muted sounds of staff moving behind the scenes. Carts rolling, dishes stacked, voices lowered into functional communication. Dana stopped just inside the threshold. From here, she could see both spaces at once, the performance and the structure supporting it. She reached into her coat pocket and removed her phone. The screen lit up with quiet efficiency. No missed calls, no urgent alerts, only the expected. A new message from Evelyn Carter. "All documents secured, board confirmation filed, awaiting your instruction." Dana read it once. Then again, not because she needed to, but because she always confirmed. Her thumb hovered briefly above the screen, then moved. "Proceed with preliminary review. Focus on executive conduct and discretionary accounts." She paused, then added, "No external communication yet." The message sent without sound. No emphasis, no escalation, just movement. Back in the ballroom, the energy had shifted again. Alcohol softened edges, conversations loosened. Boundaries blurred just enough to allow things that would not have happened earlier in the evening. Anthony had moved toward the bar with Lena. Their proximity no longer required justification, not in this phase of the night. "Another?" Lena asked, gesturing toward the bartender. Anthony nodded. Why not? The glass slid across the polished surface toward him. He picked it up without hesitation. Behind them, a few colleagues watched, not openly, but not entirely discreetly either. Patterns were being noticed. They always were. Anthony leaned slightly closer to Lena as he spoke. You stayed close tonight, he said. Lena smiled. Someone had to. And that someone was you. It usually is. Their conversation narrowed, closing itself off from the room, even as they remained fully visible within it. Dana re-entered the ballroom at that moment, not toward them, but through the space. Her path cut across the edge of the room parallel to the bar, but not intersecting it. Still, Anthony saw her. Not immediately, but within seconds. His gaze caught her movement, his expression tightening just slightly before he corrected it. Hold on, he said to Lena. He stepped away from the bar, moving toward Dana with the controlled urgency of someone who needed to manage a situation before it became visible. Where were you? He asked as he reached her. His tone was low, but not gentle. Dana stopped. Walking, she said. Anthony glanced around briefly, ensuring no one was close enough to hear clearly. You shouldn't just disappear like that, he said. People notice. Dana looked at him. Do they? His jaw tightened. This isn't the place to what, she asked quietly. The question was not confrontational, but it removed his ability to define the moment. Anthony exhaled sharply. You need to be more aware, he said, of how things look. Dana held his gaze. And how do they look? He hesitated. Not because he didn't have an answer, because he had too many. And none of them would land the way he intended in this exact moment. From the bar, Lena watched, not moving, not intervening, but present, always present. Anthony stepped closer. Just stay near me, he said, for the rest of the night. Dana's eyes did not leave his. I think I've seen enough, she replied. The words were soft, almost lost in the ambient noise. But they landed. Anthony frowned slightly. What does that mean? Dana did not answer immediately, because she did not need to. The meaning was not for him to understand yet. It was for him to feel, just briefly, before everything else followed. She stepped past him, not quickly, not dramatically, just forward, leaving him standing between the room he believed he controlled, and the version of it that was already beginning to shift. Behind him, the music continued. Glasses clinked, voices rose and fell. Nothing had broken, not yet, but something had been set into motion that would not stop. And for the first time that night, Anthony felt it, not clearly, not fully, but enough to know something was no longer in his control. The music continued, and to anyone standing far enough away, nothing appeared to have changed. Laughter rose in soft bursts. Glasses touched and separated. Conversations looped back into themselves with practiced ease. The room remained elegant, contained intact. But the center of gravity had shifted. Not visibly, not yet. Only in the places where attention sharpened instead of relaxed. Anthony Cole stood where Dana had left him, his hand still loosely holding the glass he had not raised to his lips. For a moment, he did not move. The words she had spoken, I think I've seen enough, did not carry volume, but they carried weight. Enough of what the question hovered unanswered. He turned slightly, scanning the room as if he might locate the answer in the arrangement of people, in the placement of bodies and conversations. But everything looked the same, which made it worse. At the bar, Lena Whitmore remained. Uncomposed, her gaze steady on him, her expression unchanged. She did not call out. She did not approach. She waited. Anthony moved back toward her, his steps measured but quicker than before. What was that about? Lena asked, as he reached her. Her voice low calibrated. Nothing, Anthony said. She tilted her head slightly. It didn't look like nothing. Anthony exhaled, setting the glass down on the bar with more force than necessary. He stopped himself, adjusting his tone. She doesn't understand how these things work. Lena studied him for a moment, then gave a small, knowing smile. Some people don't need to, she said. The statement was designed to soothe, to simplify. Anthony nodded, accepting it because it aligned with what he already believed. Behind them, two junior managers exchanged a glance before quickly looking away. It was subtle but not invisible. The room was beginning to notice patterns it had previously ignored. Anthony leaned slightly closer to Lena. "Let's not do this here," he said. Lena's expression softened just enough. "Of course," she replied. But her eyes flicked briefly across the room toward the path Dana had taken. Near the edge of the ballroom, Dana Barnes moved through the space without drawing attention. Her pace remained even, her expression unchanged. But her focus had narrowed. She no longer needed to observe broadly. The patterns had already aligned. What remained now was confirmation through structure. She reached a quieter corner near a secondary exit where the lighting softened and the noise thinned just enough to allow clarity. Her phone rested in her hand. The screen lit up with a new notification. Michael Reeves, initial review complete. Multiple discrepancies tied to executive discretionary accounts. Some linked to Mr. Cole. Details ready. Dana read the message once, then opened the attachment. Rows of data appeared. Dates, amounts, locations. Cross-referenced with internal approvals and reimbursement justifications. Clean, precise, undeniable. Her thumb moved slowly across the screen, scrolling through the entries. Not searching, confirming. A second notification followed. Evelyn Carter. We've secured internal footage from tonight's event. Multiple angles. Clear visibility. No obstruction. Dana's gaze remained on the screen. She did not open the video. Not yet. She didn't need to see it to know what it contained. The room had seen it. And more importantly, it had recorded it. She typed a response. Preserve all copies. Restrict access. No edits. A pause. Then another message. Prepare internal conduct review. Include financial discrepancies. She read both messages before sending them. No escalation. No urgency in tone. Just direction. The system would move because it was designed to, not because she forced it. Back at the center of the room, Anthony had begun to recover his rhythm. The initial disruption, whatever it had been, was fading under the influence of attention. Conversations resumed around him. A senior client approached offering congratulations. A director from another department joined, briefly reinforcing alignment. Anthony responded, as he always did, confident, controlled. He spoke about upcoming initiatives, about expansion, about vision. The language flowed easily, filling the space where uncertainty had briefly appeared. Lena remained nearby, her presence, reinforcing his position without overshadowing it. At one point, she leaned in slightly. "You're fine," she said quietly. "Everyone's still with you." Anthony nodded. "I know." And for a moment he believed it, because the room still looked the same. Near the entrance, a small group of executives had gathered in quieter conversation. Among them, Richard Halpern stood with his hands loosely clasped, his expression thoughtful. "Have you heard anything from corporate?" one of them asked. Richard shook his head slightly. "Not yet," he said. "But the timing feels deliberate." Another executive glanced toward Anthony. "He's acting like it's already done." Richard followed the glance. "That may be part of the problem," he said. The group fell silent. Not in agreement, in consideration. Dana returned to the main space just as the energy began to dip slightly. The first wave of excitement had passed. The room was settling into a more natural rhythm, less structured, more revealing. She moved past the tables without stopping. Her presence remained unmarked, unchallenged, unnoticed, until she reached the edge of Anthony's line of sight again. This time he saw her immediately. His expression tightened just briefly, then smoothed. He stepped toward her once more, closing the distance, with a controlled urgency that did not yet draw attention. "We need to talk," he said quietly. Dana stopped. "Do we?" His jaw shifted. This isn't the place for whatever that was earlier. Dana considered him. The lighting caught the edge of her face, highlighting nothing dramatic, only stillness. "You're right," she said. Relief flickered across his expression. "Good," he replied. "Then but it already happened," she added. The sentence cut cleanly through his momentum. Anthony frowned. "What does that mean?" Dana held his gaze. "It means you don't get to decide when something matters." For a moment, the room around them seemed to recede. Not physically, but in focus. Anthony's control wavered, not enough for others to notice, but enough for him to feel. "You're overreacting," he said, his voice tightening. Dana did not respond immediately. Because she was not reacting, she was finishing. "I'm responding," she said quietly. The distinction landed. Anthony stepped closer. Dana, she moved past him. Again, not abruptly, not dramatically, just forward, leaving him with nothing to push against. Across the room, Lena watched the exchange more closely this time. Her expression had changed. Slightly, not concern, awareness. Because something in Anthony's posture no longer matched the certainty he had carried earlier in the night. It was small, but it was there. Near the side corridor, Dana paused once more. Her phone vibrated again. A final message from Evelyn. "Board documentation finalized. Ready for formal disclosure upon your signal." Dana looked at the screen, then at the room, at Anthony, at the structure he believed he stood at the center of. Her thumb hovered, then lowered. Not yet, because timing, like everything else, required precision. And the moment had not fully arrived. But it was close, closer than anyone in the room understood. Closer than Anthony was prepared for. Dana slipped the phone back into her coat, then stepped forward into the space once more. Not to join it, to end it. The room did not quiet all at once. It thinned, like a tide withdrawing by inches, leaving behind the shape of what had been there moments before. Conversations shortened. Laughter lost its edge. A few people checked their phones with more intention than habit, as if something unseen had begun to circulate just beneath the surface. From the far side of the ballroom, Dana Barnes noticed the first visible shift. Not in Anthony Cole, in the system around him. A director from Compliance, Harrison Pike, entered through the side doors with 2 members of internal security. They did not move quickly. They did not draw attention. But their presence altered the geometry of the room. Staff recognized them without needing introductions. A few conversations paused mid-sentence. Dana did not approach. She observed. Because this was not confrontation. This was process. Her phone vibrated once. A message from Evelyn Carter. Internal review initiated. Compliance team on site. Financial discrepancies and conduct report linked. Awaiting executive confirmation. Dana read it, then let the screen dim. Across the room, Anthony continued speaking with a cluster of senior managers, his posture still aligned with control. He had shifted topics away from vision toward logistics, expansion timelines, staffing adjustments, numbers that gave the illusion of certainty. But even as he spoke, something began to fracture. A pause that lasted too long. A glance that did not return. A colleague who excused himself without explanation. Anthony noticed. Of course he did. He had built his awareness around reaction. "What's going on?" he asked one of the managers as the man stepped back. "Just something from corporate," the manager replied. "Probably nothing. Probably." The word lingered. Anthony nodded, but his gaze had already shifted past the conversation, searching the room with a sharper edge. Near the entrance, Harrison Pike spoke quietly with Richard Halpern. Their exchange brief, but focused. Richard's expression tightened slightly, then settled into neutrality as he nodded once. The conversation ended. But its effect did not. Richard moved toward the center of the room, his pace controlled. "Anthony," he called, not loudly but clearly enough. Anthony turned. For a moment, relief flickered, recognition, authority, alignment. "Richard," he said, stepping forward. "Everything good?" Richard's expression remained composed. "We need a moment," he said. "Not a request, a transition." Anthony hesitated just slightly. "Now?" he asked. "Yes." The answer was simple, unnegotiable. Around them, the room adjusted again. Conversations softened further. A few people stepped back, creating space without appearing to do so. Lena, standing just behind Anthony, watched closely. Anthony forced a small smile. "Excuse me," he said to the group, then followed Richard toward the side corridor. As they walked, Anthony's pace remained steady, but his mind had begun to move faster. "What's this about?" he asked once they were clear of the main room. Richard did not stop walking. "Internal review," he said. "Compliance flagged some issues." Anthony's jaw tightened. "What kind of issues?" "Financial discrepancies," Richard replied. "And conduct concerns." The words landed without emphasis. But they landed. Anthony exhaled once. There has to be some mistake," he said. "If this is about expenses, those are approved through, we'll go through it," Richard said. Still calm, still controlled. They reached a smaller conference room just off the corridor. Inside, Harrison Pike stood beside a table where several folders had already been arranged. Anthony stopped at the doorway. The room was too prepared, too complete. "This is unnecessary," he said. "We can handle this tomorrow." Harrison looked up. "Mr. Cole," he said evenly, "the review has already begun." Anthony stepped inside. "This is my promotion event," he said, his voice tightening, despite his effort to control it. "You're pulling me out in the middle of—" "This is not optional," Harrison replied. Silence followed. Not long, but long enough. Anthony's gaze moved across the table. Documents, printouts, a tablet displaying paused video footage. His reflection flickered faintly on the dark screen. "This is about tonight," he said. Not a question, a realization. Harrison did not answer directly. "We have multiple sources," he said instead. "We'll review everything." Anthony's control slipped just slightly. "This is being blown out of proportion," he said. "Whatever you think you saw—" "We're not relying on what we think," Harrison replied. He tapped the tablet once. The screen lit up. A still frame appeared. Anthony, his arm raised, Dana in front of him. The moment suspended. Clear, undeniable. Anthony looked away first, only for a second. But it was enough. "This doesn't show context," he said quickly. "You don't know what happened before." "We will," Harrison said. "That's the purpose of the review." Anthony's hands moved to his sides, then back again, searching for a position that restored control. "This is—" he began, then stopped, because the room did not respond the way he expected. No one challenged the evidence. No one softened the moment. Richard stood near the door, silent now, his earlier authority replaced by distance. Anthony turned toward him. "You know me," he said. "You've seen my work." Richard held his gaze. "I have," he said. Nothing more. No defense, no alignment, just acknowledgement, which in that moment felt like absence. Anthony exhaled again, slower this time. Fine, he said. We'll go through it. Harrison nodded. We will. Back in the ballroom, the absence had been noticed. Anthony's disappearance did not go unmarked, not immediately questioned, but noted. Conversations shifted. Speculation began quietly. At the bar, Lena remained still, her posture unchanged, but her focus sharpened. She had seen the direction he was taking. She had seen the compliance team, and she understood enough to recognize the pattern. This was not routine. Across the room, Donna stood near the same edge she had occupied before. Nothing in her posture suggested involvement. Nothing in her expression revealed outcome. But her attention remained fixed, because this was the moment where structure overtook performance. Her phone vibrated once more. Evelyn, compliance proceeding. Board authorization supports full review, awaiting next instruction. Dana read the message, then lifted her gaze toward the corridor where Anthony had disappeared. The room continued to move. People spoke, glasses lifted, music played. But beneath it, the system had already engaged. And once engaged, it did not stop. Donna did not move toward the corridor. She did not follow. She did not intervene, because she did not need to. Everything that mattered was already in motion. Not because of what happened tonight, but because tonight had confirmed what already existed. And for the first time since the evening began, Anthony was no longer in the room. Not in the way that mattered. Inside the conference room, the air had a different weight. It was not louder than the ballroom, not harsher. But it carried consequence in a way the celebration outside never could. Here, words did not perform. They documented. Anthony Cole remained standing for a moment after the video froze on the screen. His image captured mid-motion, arm-raised expression, sharpened into something unrecognizable, even to himself, hovered in the center of the table. The angle was clean. The lighting sufficient. There were no obstructions. It did not need sound. He pulled out the chair opposite Harrison Pike and sat down. The movement was controlled, deliberate, as if the act of sitting might restore alignment. It doesn't show what led up to that. Anthony said, his voice lower, now tighter. You're isolating a moment without context. Harrison did not respond immediately. He tapped the tablet once more, and the video resumed. The seconds before the strike played out in silence. Anthony's posture, Dana's stillness, the distance between them, the way the room adjusted even before impact. Then the moment itself. Then the aftermath. People stepping back, phones lifting, no intervention. Harrison paused the footage again. We'll review all angles, he said. Context will be included. Anthony leaned back slightly, exhaling through his nose. This is being escalated too quickly, he said. There are internal protocols for handling. There are, Harrison agreed. And they're being followed. The answer was neutral, which made it immovable. Anthony's gaze shifted toward Richard Halpern, who remained near the door, his posture straight, his expression unreadable. Richard, Anthony said, you know how these things can look. People record what they want to see. Richard held his gaze for a moment, then said, that's why we rely on more than one source. It was not a dismissal, but it was not support. Anthony's jaw tightened. He turned back to the table, focusing on the documents now laid out in front of him. Printed reports, expense logs, reimbursement summaries. His name appeared more than once, more than he expected. These are standard executive expenses, he said, picking up one of the sheets. Client dinners, travel prep, nothing outside policy. Harrison slid another document across the table. This entry, he said, lists a 2-night hotel stay categorized as vendor preparation. Anthony glanced down. I was meeting with a supplier, he replied. On a weekend, Harrison said. Anthony did not look up. Schedules don't always align with weekdays. Harrison nodded once, then tapped the tablet again. A second file opened. This time, a series of timestamps, entry and exit logs from the hotel, security footage stills. Anthony recognized the hallway, recognized himself, recognized the second figure entering the room behind him. He did not speak. Harrison let the silence hold for a moment. "We're not drawing conclusions yet," he said. "We're documenting patterns." Anthony placed the paper back down. His control had not disappeared, but it had narrowed. "This has nothing to do with my performance," he said. "You're mixing personal matters with professional review." Harrison met his gaze. "Financial records and conduct during a company event are not personal matters." Anthony leaned forward slightly. "This is a promotion review," he said, "not an investigation." "It's both now," Harrison replied. The distinction settled. Anthony's hands pressed briefly against the table. He withdrew them immediately. "You're making a mistake," he said. Harrison did not respond, because the system did not argue. It proceeded. Back in the ballroom, the absence had begun to take shape. At first, it was just a question. Where did he go? Then a pattern. Compliance pulled him. Then a shift. People stopped pretending not to notice. Conversations lowered. Eyes moved toward the corridor more often than toward the stage. At the bar, Lena Whitmore stood with her glass untouched. Her expression remained composed. But her attention had sharpened into calculation. She approached Megan Holloway, who stood near one of the side tables. "Do you know what's happening?" Lena asked, her tone light but focused. Megan hesitated. "I'm not sure," she said. "Something from compliance." Lena nodded once. "Timing's interesting." Megan did not respond. Because it was. Near the edge of the room, Dana Barnes stood where she had been for most of the evening. Still, unmarked, but no longer entirely invisible. A few glances had begun to find her. Not recognition, not yet, but awareness. Because absence creates space, and space draws attention. Her phone vibrated again. Michael Reeves. Additional findings confirmed. Reimbursement overlap. Unauthorized approvals. Full report ready for executive review. Dana read the message. Then another followed. Evelyn Carter. Compliance requesting confirmation on disclosure timeline. Board prepared to proceed. Dana did not answer immediately. She lifted her gaze instead, toward the corridor, where the review continued. Timing, always timing. Inside the conference room, the structure of the conversation had shifted. Less resistance, more documentation. Anthony sat back in his chair, his earlier certainty replaced by calculation. "If this proceeds formally," he said, "you'll need to consider the impact on the company." Harrison nodded. "We are." Public perception, Anthony continued. Client relationships, internal stability. "We're aware," Harrison said. Anthony leaned forward again. "Then you know this needs to be managed carefully." Harrison's expression did not change. "It will be managed according to policy." The phrase landed without emphasis. But it carried finality. Anthony's gaze flicked once more toward Richard. "Looking for something, anything." Richard spoke this time. "Anthony," he said, "this is not about managing perception." Anthony held his eyes. "Then what is it about?" Richard did not hesitate. "Accountability." The words settled into the room with more weight than any document. Anthony did not respond, because there was no argument that could reshape it. Back in the ballroom, the energy had cooled, not collapsed, but altered. The performance had ended. The structure had taken over, and those who understood the difference had begun to adjust. Dana remained where she was, not stepping forward, not stepping back, Because her role was not to interrupt the process. It was to complete it. Her phone remained in her hand, the screen dim, waiting for instruction, for timing, for the moment when silence would no longer be necessary. Because the system had done its work. The evidence had aligned. The room had shifted. And Anthony, for the first time that night, was no longer shaping the outcome. He was waiting for it. The ballroom did not empty. It rearranged itself around uncertainty. Clusters that had once been tight began to loosen. Conversations no longer overlapped with the same confidence. People checked their phones more frequently now, not out of habit but anticipation. Something had moved beyond speculation. It was no longer a question of if something was happening. Only what? Near the entrance, a quiet shift occurred. 2 additional figures entered, not from Stratford Dynamics, not from the event staff. Recognizable to those who knew how to recognize them. Senior board representatives from Barnes Capital Group. They did not announce themselves. They did not need to. Their presence carried a different kind of authority, one that did not depend on introductions. Evelyn Carter walked with them, her posture unchanged, her expression neutral. But her arrival altered the room more than any speech had. A few executives noticed immediately. Richard Halpern was one of them. He stepped forward, his movements controlled but direct. "Evelyn," he said, offering a brief nod. "Richard," she replied. No smiles, no performance, only acknowledgement. "We'll need the room," Evelyn said quietly. Richard did not ask which room. He already understood. He glanced once toward the corridor where Anthony had been taken, then back at Evelyn. "It's ready," he said. The exchange lasted seconds, but it carried enough weight to ripple outward. Inside the conference room, the atmosphere had stabilized into something colder. The initial resistance had passed. What remained was documentation. Anthony Cole sat with his hands folded loosely in front of him, his posture no longer projecting certainty, but not yet collapsing. He had shifted strategies. From denial to control. "You're making this larger than it needs to be," he said, his tone measured again. "These issues can be handled internally without escalation." Harrison Pike did not look up from the documents he was reviewing. "They are being handled internally." Anthony exhaled slowly. "You know what I mean." Before Harrison could respond, the door opened. Evelyn Carter stepped inside, followed by 2 board representatives, Jonathan Pierce and Laura Bennett. Their presence changed the room instantly. Not louder, not sharper, just heavier. Anthony stood. Instinct, recognition. "This is unnecessary," he said, though his voice carried less force than before. "We're already in the middle of a review." Evelyn met his gaze. "This is part of that review." Anthony looked from her to the others, his awareness catching up to the shift. "What is this?" he asked. No one answered immediately, because the answer did not require explanation, it required acknowledgement. Jonathan Pierce moved to the head of the table, his presence quiet but definitive. "Mr. Cole," he said, "please take your seat." Anthony hesitated, then sat. Not because he agreed, because the structure no longer gave him room to refuse. Evelyn placed a single folder in front of him. It was thinner than the others, more precise. "Before we proceed further," she said, "there is a matter of authority that needs to be clarified." Anthony frowned. "I think we're clear on authority," he said. "This is a Stratford issue." Evelyn did not respond to the statement. Instead, she opened the folder and turned it toward him. Inside, a single document, clean, structured, signed. Anthony's eyes moved across the page. At first, nothing registered. Then names, titles, legal language, and at the bottom, Dana Barnes. His gaze paused, then returned to the top, reading again, slower this time. "What is this?" he asked, his voice quieter now. Evelyn's tone remained even. "Effective this afternoon, operational control of Stratford Dynamics has been formally consolidated under Barnes Capital Group." Anthony looked up. "I know that," he said. "Corporate." Under the direct authority of Dana Barnes, Evelyn continued. The room held. Anthony did not move, did not speak, because the sentence did not fit. Not with what he knew, not with what he believed. "That's not possible," he said finally. No one corrected him immediately, because denial at this stage was expected. Jonathan Pierce spoke instead. "It is not only possible," he said, "it is executed." Anthony's gaze dropped back to the document, then lifted again. "This is a mistake," he said. "Dana, my wife, she's not." Evelyn's voice remained steady. "She is the chief executive officer of Barnes Capital Group." Silence, not empty, complete. Anthony's hands shifted slightly on the table. A small movement. But the first visible break. "That's not," he began, then stopped. Because the document did not change. Because the names did not rearrange themselves. Because the room did not respond in a way that allowed him to reinterpret what he was seeing. Richard Halpern looked down. Not out of avoidance, out of recognition. The pattern had revealed itself. Fully. Anthony's gaze moved from one face to another, looking for contradiction, for uncertainty, for anything that would restore the version of reality he had entered the night with. There was none. "Since when?" he asked. Evelyn answered, "Since before tonight." The words landed without emphasis, but they carried weight, because they reframed everything. The promotion, the speech, the room, all of it. Anthony leaned back slightly, the motion slower now. "This doesn't make sense," he said. Evelyn closed the folder. "It does," she replied. "You simply did not have access to the information." The distinction was precise. Not hidden, not deceptive, just beyond him. Anthony exhaled once more. Longer this time. His earlier strategy's controlled deflection negotiation had nowhere to attach, because the structure itself had shifted. "And she's been what he asked." Watching Evelyn did not answer that directly, because the answer was already present in the room, in the documents, in the timing, in the sequence of events that had led him here. Back in the ballroom, the shift had reached the surface. Conversations had slowed, clusters had thinned. People were no longer pretending not to notice. At the edge of the room, Dana Barnes stood with the same quiet stillness she had carried all evening. But now, she was being seen. Not recognized fully. Not yet. But attention had begun to settle on her. A few executives had connected the arrival of Barnes Capital representatives with the absence of Anthony, with the tension, with the silence spreading through the room. Patterns. They were always there. People just needed a moment to see them. Donna did not move, did not step forward, because she understood something the room did not. That revelation did not require performance. It required timing, and timing was already complete. Her phone remained still in her hand. No new messages, no urgency, because everything that needed to be said had already been written, signed, delivered. Inside the conference room, Anthony sat in front of the document that had just undone him. Not through accusation, not through volume, but through structure, through fact, through a name he thought he understood now, placed where he had never thought to look. And for the first time since the night began, he was not reacting to a moment. He was confronting a reality that had existed long before he entered the room, one he had simply never been allowed to see. The document did not move. It remained where Evelyn Carter had placed it, centered, aligned, unambiguous. The kind of page that did not require explanation once read carefully enough. It did not argue. It did not accuse. It simply defined. Across from it, Anthony Cole sat very still. The room had quieted into a level of attention that felt almost surgical. No one rushed to fill the silence. No one softened the edges. In places like this, restraint was not politeness. It was procedure. Anthony's gaze lowered again, returning to the page, as if repetition might alter meaning. It did not. Operational control? Consolidated, he read under his breath, his voice losing the confidence it had carried only an hour earlier. Effective immediately. His eyes tracked the language down to the signature line. Dana Barnes. There was no flourish, no attempt to impress, just a name written with precision. Anthony let out a slow breath, then lifted his head. So this was planned, he said. It was not a question. Evelyn met his gaze. The transition has been in process for some time. Anthony's jaw tightened, and she didn't say anything. No, Evelyn replied. A small pause. Not to you. The distinction settled. Anthony leaned back slightly in his chair, his hands coming together in front of him as if he were trying to reconstruct something that had already been dismantled. And you're telling me, he said slowly, that my entire role here, my promotion. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Jonathan Pierce spoke instead. Your role was subject to review under the new structure, he said, as is standard. Anthony gave a short, humorless exhale. Standard, he repeated. His gaze shifted toward Richard Halpern. You knew, he asked. Richard did not answer immediately. Then quietly, I knew there was a transition. Not the details. It was the closest thing to honesty the moment allowed. Anthony nodded once. Not in agreement, in recognition, because what he had assumed was alignment had in reality been distance. He looked back at the table, at the documents, at the pattern that had already closed around him. And tonight he said, you let this play out. Evelyn's expression remained unchanged. Tonight confirmed several outstanding concerns. Anthony's eyes lifted sharply. Confirmed, he repeated. Evelyn did not look away. Conduct, she said. Use of discretionary funds. Misrepresentation of expenses. All of which required verification. Anthony's hands pressed lightly against the table. You're building a case, he said. We're completing a review, Evelyn corrected. The difference mattered, because one implied intention. The other implied inevitability. Anthony leaned forward slightly. You could have stopped it, he said, before it got to this point. Evelyn held his gaze. We did not intervene in your actions. The sentence was simple. But it carried everything. Anthony looked away first, because there was no argument that could change the fact that what had happened had come from him. In the ballroom, the shift had reached a point where silence began to carry meaning. Conversations no longer attempted to fill the space. They circled around it. People spoke more carefully now, their words measured not just for content, but for alignment. Who they stood near, who they avoided, where they directed their attention. At the bar, Lena Whitmore had stopped pretending not to watch the corridor. Her glass remained in her hand, but untouched. The confidence she had worn earlier in the evening had not disappeared. It had tightened, focused, because something had moved beyond speculation, and she understood enough to recognize that it was not in her control. Across the room, Megan Holloway stood with two other HR managers, their conversation reduced to fragments. Compliance doesn't come in during events like this. Unless it's already escalated, they wouldn't do that without approval. Their voices remained low. But the conclusions were forming, not fully, not yet, but enough. Near the edge of the room, Dana Barnes remained where she had been. Still, composed, but no longer invisible. A few more eyes found her now, not because they understood who she was, but because something about her stillness no longer matched the rest of the room. When tension rises, movement increases, except in those who already know the outcome. Dana's posture had not changed since the evening began, and that difference had begun to register. Inside the conference room, the structure of the conversation had reached its final phase. Documentation complete, authority established. What remained was consequence. Harrison Pike gathered the financial reports into a single stack, aligning the edges before speaking. Based on the findings, he said, we will be proceeding with a formal internal investigation. Anthony did not react immediately. He was already there. In that understanding. What does that mean for my position, he asked. Jonathan Pierce answered, effective immediately, you are suspended from all executive duties pending the outcome of the investigation. The words landed cleanly. No hesitation, no adjustment. Anthony nodded once. A small movement, controlled. And access, he asked. Revoked, Harrison said. System credentials, financial authorization, internal communication channels. Anthony's lips pressed together briefly, then released. And communication, he asked. Limited, Evelyn replied. All external statements will be handled through corporate channels. Anthony sat back. The chair absorbed the movement. For a moment, no one spoke, because there was nothing left to clarify. Anthony's gaze moved once more to the document. Dana's name, placed exactly where authority resided. And she'll be the one deciding, he said. It was not framed as a question. Evelyn answered anyway. She will be informed of all findings. Anthony let out a breath that was almost a laugh. Almost. She already is, he said. No one corrected him, because he was right. The door opened. Not abruptly, but with intention. A member of security stood just outside. Mr. Cole, he said, we'll need to escort you out. Anthony looked at him, then at the others. No one intervened. No one objected. Because this, too, was part of the process. Anthony stood. This time, there was no attempt to restore posture, no adjustment of his jacket, no performance, just movement. As he stepped toward the door, his eyes passed over the table one last time. The documents, the reports, the structure that had closed around him without noise. Then he walked out. In the ballroom, the door at the end of the corridor opened. A few heads turned. Not all, but enough. Anthony stepped into view. Alone. Not escorted visibly, but not accompanied either. Which in this context meant the same thing. The room did not react immediately. But the silence deepened. Because something had changed. And everyone could feel it. Anthony paused just inside the entrance. His gaze moved across the room. Slower now, more deliberate, until it found Dana. She stood where she had always been, unmoved, unaltered, but no longer part of the background. For a moment, neither of them spoke, neither of them moved. The distance between them remained, but the meaning of that distance had changed completely. Because now he knew, and the room was beginning to understand. The distance between them was no longer neutral. It had become defined, not by space, but by recognition. From across the ballroom, Anthony Cole stood still for a moment longer than necessary, as if the act of moving toward Dana Barnes now required more than instinct. Earlier that night, approaching her had been a matter of control. A decision made quickly, executed without hesitation. Now it carried consequence. Around them, the room had quieted into something sharper. Conversations continued, but at a lower register. People no longer pretended not to watch. They simply adjusted how openly they did it. Anthony began to walk. Not quickly, not slowly, measured. Each step deliberate, as if he were recalibrating his presence with every movement. His posture had not collapsed. That was not the kind of man he was. But the certainty that had once shaped it had been replaced by something more contained. When he reached her, he stopped just outside the distance he had crossed so easily before. Dana. Her name was different now in his voice, not louder, but stripped of assumption. Dana turned her head slightly, meeting his gaze without shifting the rest of her posture. Yes, there was no question in her tone, only acknowledgement. Anthony held her eyes for a moment, searching not for confirmation, but for something he could still understand. "You knew," he said. It was not framed as an accusation. It was an attempt to locate the beginning of what he had just learned. Dana considered him. "I knew what I needed to know," she replied. The answer did not satisfy him, but it did not invite argument either. Anthony exhaled slowly, his gaze dropping for a brief second before returning to her. "And you let this happen." This time there was weight behind the words. Dana did not respond immediately, because the statement required precision. "I didn't stop you," she said. The distinction was small, but exact. Anthony's jaw tightened. "That's the same thing." "No," Dana said quietly. "It isn't." The room around them seemed to pull back further, as if even the ambient noise understood that this conversation existed outside of it. Anthony stepped slightly closer. "You could have said something," he said, "at any point." Dana's expression remained unchanged. And what would that have changed? The question landed without force. But it opened space. Anthony did not answer right away, because the truth of it did not support him. He shifted instead. "This didn't need to become public," he said. There were other ways to handle it. Dana watched him carefully. "Public," she repeated. A brief pause. "You mean visible?" Anthony's expression hardened slightly. "I mean controlled." Dana held his gaze. "You had control," she said, "of your actions." The sentence settled between them. Unavoidable. Anthony looked away first, just for a moment, because there was no version of that statement he could reshape. When he looked back, something had changed again. Not in his posture, in his understanding. "They've suspended me," he said. Dana nodded once. "I know." The answer came too quickly for it to be reaction. Anthony caught that. "Of course you do," he said. There was no bitterness in it, only recognition, because the structure he had just encountered in the conference room did not operate without her awareness. "And now?" he asked. The question was quieter, more direct. Dana considered it. Not because she needed time to decide, because she understood the weight of the answer. "Now the process continues," she said. Anthony's lips pressed together briefly. "And us?" he asked. The word carried more complexity than anything else he had said that night. Dana did not look away. "There is no use that exists outside of what's already happened," she replied. Anthony absorbed that. Silently, the music in the background shifted tracks. A slower tempo, something softer. It did not match the moment, but it filled the space. "I didn't think," he began, then stopped, because the sentence did not complete itself. Dana waited, not encouraging, not interrupting. "I didn't think it would go this far," he said finally. Dana's gaze remained steady. "It didn't," she said. Anthony frowned slightly. "What does that mean?" "It means this is exactly as far as it goes," Dana replied. The clarity of it removed interpretation. This was not escalation. This was outcome. Anthony let out a slow breath. His shoulders lowered just slightly. Not defeat, adjustment. "What happens now?" he asked again. Dana shifted her weight not away from him, but into a more grounded stance. "The investigation concludes," she said. "Legal determines next steps. Financial records are reviewed. decisions are made. Anthony nodded once. And you? He asked. Dana's expression softened, not emotionally, but in definition. I continue my work, she said. The answer was simple, because it was true. Anthony studied her for a moment longer, as if trying to reconcile the person he had lived beside with the one standing in front of him now. But the reconciliation was not possible, because the difference was not in her. It was in what he had never chosen to see. I underestimated you, he said. Dana did not respond to that, because it was not a revelation. It was a confirmation. Anthony looked around the room, at the people who were now watching openly, at the structure that had shifted without announcement, at the narrative that no longer centered him. They're all going to know, he said. Dana followed his gaze briefly. Yes, no hesitation, no comfort, just fact. Anthony's expression tightened once more. Is that what you wanted? The question carried a final attempt to frame the outcome, to assign intention. Dana looked back at him. I wanted the truth to exist where it couldn't be ignored, she said. The answer did not accuse. It did not justify. It defined. Anthony nodded slowly. There was nothing left to contest, nothing left to reframe. The system had moved, the evidence had aligned, the outcome had arrived, and it had done so without needing volume, without needing spectacle, only structure. Anthony took a step back, then another, creating space where he had once assumed proximity. Take care of yourself, he said. The words were not dramatic. They were not even fully formed. But they were what remained. Dana inclined her head slightly. You too, she said. Not as forgiveness, not as reconciliation, as closure. Anthony turned. This time he did not pause. He walked toward the exit, his path no longer intersecting with the center of the room, but moving past it, through it, out of it. The doors closed behind him without sound. The ballroom remained. But the atmosphere had changed permanently. People did not return to what they had been discussing. They shifted, realigned, processed. Across the room, eyes moved toward Dana again. But now they understood. Not fully, not in detail, but enough. She stood where she had always stood, unmoved, unaltered, but no longer unseen. And when she finally turned toward the exit, no one tried to stop her, because the moment had already completed itself. What remained was aftermath. The ballroom did not return to what it had been. It continued in a technical sense. Music resumed its place in the background. Staff cleared glasses with practiced discretion. Conversations reassembled in smaller, quieter forms. But the structure that had supported the evening's illusion no longer held. It had been replaced, not by chaos, by clarity. At the far end of the room where the doors led back into the lobby, Dana Barnes paused for a moment before stepping out, not to look back, not to mark the space, only to allow the transition to complete. Behind her, the room adjusted without her. That more than anything defined the difference. Nothing needed to follow her in order for her to leave. The doors closed softly. Outside, the night air carried a different temperature. Cooler, cleaner, free from the controlled atmosphere of the ballroom. Dana stepped onto the sidewalk, her posture unchanged, her pace steady. The city moved around her without interruption, cars passing lights, shifting people crossing intersections with no awareness of what had just concluded several floors above. Her car waited where it had before. The driver opened the door without a word. She entered, settling into the seat with the same quiet precision that had marked every decision she made that evening. The door closed. The car pulled away. For a few moments, she did not move. Her hand rested lightly over her abdomen, the gesture instinctive grounding. The events of the night did not replay in her mind as images or emotions. They existed as sequence, as structure, as confirmation. Everything that had been uncertain was no longer uncertain. Everything that had been observed was now recorded. And everything that had required decision had already been decided. Her phone remained in her hand, the screen dark, until it lit again. Evelyn Carter. Initial statements prepared. Internal notice scheduled for morning distribution. External response pending your review. Dana read the message once, then typed, "Internal first. No external statement until legal clears language." She paused, then added, "Ensure employee protections are included." The reply sent. A second message followed, this time from Michael Reeves. Financial access fully secured. Interim leadership structure ready for approval. Dana considered that, then responded, "Send recommendations. Prioritize stability over optics." The car turned onto a quieter street. The city thinned around her. What remained was movement without noise. The next morning, Stratford Dynamics did not open as it had the day before. There were no announcements over speakers. No emergency meetings called with urgency. Only an email, sent at 8:00 a.m. precisely, clear, structured, delivered simultaneously to every employee. Subject line, Internal Notice Leadership and Conduct Review. It outlined the facts, not the speculation, not the narrative, the structure. A formal internal investigation had been initiated. Anthony Cole had been suspended pending review. All operational authority was now under Barnes Capital Group. Interim leadership would be assigned immediately. Employee conduct and workplace safety remained a priority. There was no mention of the ballroom. No description of the moment that had been recorded from multiple angles. Because the system did not rely on spectacle. It relied on documentation. And those who needed to know already did. By mid-morning, the office had settled into a different rhythm. Quieter, more precise. People spoke carefully, not out of fear, out of awareness, because something had shifted that could not be reversed. In a conference room overlooking the city, Dana stood at the head of a table. Not alone, but not surrounded in the way Anthony had been the night before. Evelyn Carter sat to her right, Michael Reeves to her left. A small group of senior advisors occupied the remaining seats. No introductions were made. They were unnecessary. The room was already aligned. "Interim leadership recommendations," Michael said, sliding a document forward. Dana reviewed the list. Names, positions, histories, each one evaluated not for visibility, but for function. She made a few adjustments. Not many, because most of the work had already been done. "Proceed with these," she said. Michael nodded. Evelyn spoke next. "Legal review is underway. Based on the evidence, we anticipate both internal and external consequences." Donna closed the document. "Ensure it stays within process," she said. "No deviations." Evelyn inclined her head. Of course. There was no urgency in the room. No raised voices, no emotional language. Because everything had moved past that. What remained was continuity. Later that afternoon, Dana returned to her office. Not the apartment she had shared with Anthony. A different space. One that had always existed, just not in his awareness. The office was quiet, minimal, functional. Large windows overlooking the city, but no emphasis placed on the view. Her desk held only what was necessary. Documents, a laptop, a single folder. She sat, opened the laptop, reviewed the final report from compliance. Every detail aligned, every sequence confirmed. There was no need to revisit the footage. The system had already interpreted it correctly. Her hand moved to the final page. Authorization, closure. She signed, the same way she had signed the documents the day before. Without hesitation, without emphasis. Just completion. As the sun lowered over the city, Dana stood once more. This time there was no event waiting, no room filled with expectation. Only the continuation of work. She gathered her things, turned off the lights, and walked out. Not away from something, forward from it. That evening the apartment remained unchanged. Physically. But its meaning had shifted. Anthony's absence was not marked by disorder. There were no signs of struggle, no evidence of conflict, only space. Dana moved through it once, not slowly, not searching, simply acknowledging. Then she stopped. For a moment, her hand resting lightly against the back of a chair. The same chair where conversations had once been held, where words had been spoken without weight, where silence had been misunderstood. She let the moment exist, then released it, because it no longer required her attention. Later, as night settled again over the city, Dana stood by the window. The lights below mirrored those from the night before, but they did not carry the same meaning, because nothing needed to be revealed anymore. Everything already had been. She placed her hand over her abdomen once more, not as a gesture of protection, as recognition that what she carried forward would not be shaped by what had been left behind. Her phone rested on the table beside her. Silent. No new messages, no urgency, because the system had completed its work. And she had completed hers. Not through confrontation, not through retaliation, but through clarity, through structure, through decisions made long before anyone else realized they were already in motion. Outside, the city continued, unaware, unchanged. But within it, one story had reached its end, not loudly, not dramatically, but with something far more permanent. Resolution. The quiet after a storm rarely feels like victory. It feels like space. The kind that arrives when noise has been removed, not replaced. When truth no longer competes with perception, and what remains does not need to be defended. Dana Barnes did not walk away. She walked away with a lion. The kind that cannot be taken once it is established. The kind that does not require witnesses to remain true. What happened in that ballroom was not the beginning of consequence. It was the confirmation of it. Every word, every action, every decision Anthony made had already been moving toward that outcome long before he ever chose to see it. And when the moment came, it did not need to be forced. It simply revealed what had been there. There is a difference between silence and absence. Silence is recorded. Feel comfortable sharing what you're watching. These quiet details connect us more than we know. And if stories like this, stories of truth and accountability, and quiet strength resonate with you, you're always welcome to stay. No pressure, just presence.